Okay, I'd like to thank everybody for coming. My name is Hallie Bernstein-Saylor. I'm editor of the Boulder City Review, and we are hosting tonight's forum. Our goal here is to help you get a better idea of the issues that are facing the city and to get to know the candidates a little better. I'd like to thank our 4 candidates. This side we have Cam Walker, Kiernan McManus, John Milburn, and Warren Harhay. I'd like to thank my co-moderator, Nate Lazoff, for helping me tonight, and Holly Webb for taping this for BCTV, so that if you didn't get it tonight, if you're not here, you will get a chance to see it online at a later date. We're working all the details out to get it when it's going to be online. The format for tonight is very similar to what we did in the past. We have asked the community to submit questions, which were all given to the candidates in advance. Then we put them in a bowl, and they were been randomly selected by people attending tonight. We will ask them. Each candidate will get 3 minutes to answer the question, and at the end we'll give them a minute to just wrap things up. Afterwards, they will have 30 minutes to meet with you individually at the tables. We will not be taking questions from the floor tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Nate. He'll get the first question going, and we'll go from there. Thank you again.
All right. Thanks, Hallie. Let's get this started off with a pretty good question, I think. Do you support leasing the land around the U.S. Highway 95 Interstate 11 interchange for commercial purposes? Let's start with Mr. Harhay, and then we'll do it like we did it back and forth. So.
Not at this time. I don't believe there's any rush to lease that land. We own the land, we control it. There's really no reason for us to rush into leasing that land or developing that land. Right now it's virgin desert, and it can remain that way. It's in a way in a bank for us now. When that intersection opens up, I'm thinking kind of facetiously that we may have to put caution when wet signs at that particular intersection. From the salivation of the developers that want to exploit that particular land. Land at that particular point is a leapfrog development, which is really contrary to what our master plan describes. In fact, it describes Boulder City being an autonomous city with desert land separating us from the rest of southern Nevada. In the past, Railroad Pass has been a cordon sanitaire to keep the rampant development that exists on the other side of the hill from encroaching into the valley, in the El Dorado Valley, and into Boulder City. I'd like to keep it that way. In fact, if there's one sentence that can define my campaign and my philosophy, is let's keep Boulder City, Boulder City.
John Milburn.
Thank you. I would like to differ with Warren Harhay on this issue. I do believe we shouldn't have leapfrog development with our residential developments. We need to keep our city small like it is, but one of the lifebloods of our community has been our leases, our commercial leases. The solar leases, for example, are way out there. I do not consider this to be included as part of, like I said, as part of our residential development. The money that we have obtained from these leases at present time is up with our budget of 30 million has 10 million. I noticed when I looked at the budget, 10 million from all these different leases. I'm in favor of slow residential growth, but at the same time, I am in favor of pursuing any type of commercial development that I think could financially help the city. I am aware that after looking at some research, particularly I'd like to mention some research that I got from Rob Levitt, who's gave me some very rational information backed up by research to show that growth on the bypass of cities is not good for most. It takes away, detracts from the city. As this is the only place that we have that's on the bypass, that's prime commercial land, I'm in favor of looking to pursue non-competitive commercial growth there. I don't want to compete with commercial growth that we have in town. And I'd be in favor of looking at that, not being on the city council right now and knowing not what those leases would be. I can't speak to that, but I certainly would want to look at it. Thank you.
Kieran McManus.
Good evening. I am not in favor of what's being proposed out there at the intersection at this time. When you look at our controlled growth ordinance, it actually consists of numerous parts. There's not one part to it that refers to what we can or can't do. There were a number of initiatives passed over a period of time because of the way things were done here in Boulder City. One of those being the prohibition against the sale, transfer of land of more than 1 acre without a vote of the people. Regarding the development that's been proposed out there, the city is already, the current council has already commissioned a study, spent, I believe it was $30,000 on a study out there, without having a vote of the people on whether that land should be used or not. The land that's being used for our solar leases right now was voted on many years ago, and that whole area was approved by the voters to be used as a solar energy generation, power transfer, things of that nature, the types of uses that are being done down there at this time. I do agree with Mr. Harhay that just because the bypass is going through does not mean that we have to take advantage of it right now. I also think that when we look at private companies, Railroad Pass is doing the same type of development with regard to a truck stop as is being proposed out there at the bypass intersection. I don't think that that's in the best interest of a city government to be pursuing business options that are going to damage something that a private business is already conducting. So when we look at that land out there, I don't think that just because the bypass is going in, will probably be completed sometime next year, that there's a rush for us to go out there and develop it. The other thing that I think we often forget is when we see studies that were done recently and there's all these great artist renditions, that everything like that is going to be a success. Well, it's going to cost millions of dollars to extend utilities out to that location. There would need to be water lines, power lines, sewer lines. All would have to be paid for in order for that land to be leased to anyone. And even the financial consultant that was involved in the study said that there would be a problem if this was not put to a vote of the people. So there's no guarantee of success, and I think that we have plenty of time to take a look at it. Thank you.
Councilman Cam Walker.
Thank you. And thank you all for being here and for setting this up for tonight so we can learn a little bit about each of the candidates. I'm Cam Walker, and 23 years ago, my wife and I moved to Boulder City because my son was just starting kindergarten, and we were raising 4 of our 5 children at the time. And it was a great place to live, and I'm proud that it's still the same way today. It's that way because we do have a controlled growth ordinance that I support and I understand, and I've tried to work under over the last 8 years to a great success thanks to the voters of Boulder City recognizing how we have controlled growth and managed growth going forward. The question is dealing with the I-11 and 95 interchange. We don't have leapfrog growth down there. I guess we forgot that we have an 800-acre lease on Old Boulder City that was already put forward. Schuyler controls that lease today, And that lease got us $5 million into our general fund 2 years ago so they could continue to have the option to build that solar project. That solar project is not in the energy zone. That's in Old Boulder City, so it was never discussed nor was any concerns about doing renewable energy right next to the interchange. In fact, that solar project is on this side, the Boulder City side of the bypass, as well as the other side, which is something that really concerns me as we look towards building things on this side of I-11. But as we go back to the study that was mentioned, I'm kind of glad we did it. And most people don't understand that Henderson controls and the county controls land right on the other side of that interchange. I want those developers to know that we're not going to have beautiful homes down there. If they want to build homes down there, they're going to have commercial, industrial, and other types of uses, so that maybe it deters them from spending $30 million to put sewer and water over the hill, and from building houses on what many of us call hidden Henderson. You know, we're not happy with what's going on over there, and I hope they're thinking of that when they see what we may do there at that interchange. We're not proposing anything right now. I don't see anything on the horizon. We respect the controlled growth ordinance and the fact that we need to communicate with the citizens as we move things forward. And I'd finish with one other point. In 1998, I was a part of the group that helped MGM come to Cascada. Everyone was up in arms about Cascada. This is clean, green Boulder City. We don't want the hotel here. They're going to bring gambling. Well, that gives us $600,000 to $700,000 every year and is a true diamond in Boulder City that will become ours at the end of that lease now that we're almost 20 years into it. I'm proud of the fact that we manage growth together as a community, and I think we can do that at I-11. Nothing's going to happen today the sky isn't falling.
And our second question, Cami will be answering first. How would you prioritize the following expenses for city government? Public safety, emergency services, education, repair, replacement of existing infrastructure, and development of commercial districts.
Thank you. Don't get bored with hearing from me. You know, it's a great question. I think when I thought about the question, I realized, how does education play into this? And I think most people would think about Councilman Schumann's idea of giving $1 million to the school every year. But when I think about the budget of Boulder City and how it affects me and how it affects our community, education really means the Tiny Tots program, which each one of my kids went through at the rec building. It means the recreation programs like baseball, which we just kicked off last week here in Boulder City. It means the pool, which I'm an advocate for, because those provide opportunities for our kids to continue to mature and grow in a great environment. But back to the question of public safety, I think that is without question the #1 issue that government should fund and take care of. Our community's emergency services and public safety. And that's why at the last candidate forum I brought up a subject that most people don't realize, is that we're going to have 11 to 12 extra miles of interstate that our emergency services personnel have to take care of. And I've been in close contact with the fire department now that I've brought up this issue more and learned more about how we're going to manage that. But that is the #1 priority. And right now, on countless occasions, our fire department is tasked with transporting people over the hill. And when they transport over the hill, we have 2 engines on at a time. After that. When a second one is out on a call, the third one is now taking the engine, not a paramedic unit, and they can't transport or take care of someone injured in their home. That ought not to be. That's why that's my #1 priority. Second to me is replacing and repairing existing infrastructure. I've been an advocate for that. I was disappointed and happy that we're now looking forward to mapping our electrical system. I get frustrated when the power goes out, like all of us do, but I want to know what failed, how old is it, what's its priority on the replacement list, and when are we going to get to it? We don't have that today. We need to map our system, and that's been on the books for almost 3 to 4 years, and it has not been done. And I made that a priority this year, and it is going to get done, and we're looking at a unique way to map the electrical system. But that is priority number 2. And then education, our Tiny Tots and other programs, and lastly, development of commercial districts. Remember, development of a commercial district, like we talked about I-11 a minute ago, developers pay. That's what happens over the hill. They pay for all the water. They pay for all the power. They have to come up and pay for those things in order to even make their development work. So again, that's my priority, but priority 1 is public safety and taking care of our community.
Kieran McManus.
My first priority would be our infrastructure here in Boulder City. It's been neglected for a number of years. We've had money diverted in the past. Boulder Creek Golf Course construction was one of those times. We've gotten way behind on being able to take care of the basic services within our community. What I would propose doing is, at least for the next 3 years, taking a large portion, a majority of the solar lease money and devoting it specifically to repairing and replacing that infrastructure. And by infrastructure, I mean our water lines, our power, our sewer lines, and things like our municipal pool. The money that we have been getting from these solar leases has been increasing over the years. We're up to almost $10 million a year now. And that money pretty much has just gone into our general fund and not really been devoted to any particular purpose. That's money that no other city gets, and I really think that it would be important that we have a specific accounting of where that money goes so that we can devote it to projects that people here in town value. Let our normal tax dollars take care of our basic needs. Let that solar money do things for our town the way it was supposed to be. That was the original intent. With regard to public safety and emergency services, a few years ago, Clark County had passed the More Cops tax. That is an additional amount on our sales tax that we all pay. That has been going up as the economy has recovered. We are getting enough money, enough new money from that this year to add an additional officer onto our police department. So our police department is being taken care of with those extra tax dollars. Then we get to the fire department, and as Mr. Walker said, we have a small department. If we have runs that occur at the same time, especially for medical services, we could be shorthanded with that. I think one thing we need to do is look into private ambulance services for these transports. Many of these transports are for people for non-critical issues to go down to services in Las Vegas. I think that's something that would help us. The other thing we should do is look to the county and state and say, if you would like us to do all of this work along the bypass, then we are going to need some additional help out here, whether that be from the Highway Patrol or Metro. And I'm certainly not advocating that they take over our services, but we do need that kind of help, and we should not be left to do all the services that are necessary along that route. And lastly, very quickly, I'll just say on education, we have programs in our Parks and Rec, as Cam had mentioned. We can help with our schools by enhancing those programs. Thank you.
Thank you. John Milburn.
I was surprised that this question has asked us to prioritize these as expenses. The last two, education and development of commercial districts, I don't really consider as expenses. In other words, for the education, I, as a past teacher, I know that giving money to the Clark County School District makes it just disappears. And a good example is the fact that we already supply money to the school district. Most schools get baseball fields and softball fields, and they're maintained by the school district. The city already supplies a baseball field and a softball field, and we pay for the maintenance of those. We get nothing in return. I'm not in favor of donating money to the Clark County School District. At the last CIAB meeting that we went to last week, The four of us were there, and we did find out that it is possible to help the schools individually somewhat. I'm in favor of trying to help our schools by trying to fund teacher certification to get them certified to get high school credit in school. But that's not a lot of money. As far as the development of commercial districts, I don't consider that to be an expense. If it is an expense, I'm not voting for it. I don't want it. I'm assuming that when we have commercial development, it's for the purpose of us making money, getting revenue from that for the city. The first two are the major part, that's repair and replacement and safety and emergency services. Certainly they are a major part of our budget, and that is by far the most important thing, the safety and comfort of our citizens. I certainly rank those right at the top. But I do think we need to be very careful. I've learned in this campaign, at first, I thought, well, you know, when the utility department tells us we need some infrastructure, that I don't know about that, most of us don't know about that, so we'll just take their word for it. I learned the hard way early on in my campaign. I got called over to some people who were upset about the 69 kilovolt line that was being run over in Hemingway Park, and they were mainly upset because it was going to interfere with their view. And it turned out those citizens presented an alternate plan and I'd like to give thanks to Tom Perkins, who came up with these alternate plans, that could well save the city over $2 million. And so I think we need to be very careful when we look at these infrastructure repairs and make sure that they're what we really need.
Warren Harhay.
Very simply, fire, police, number one. Number two, infrastructure. Number three, commercial district development. And number four, education. Now, how do I prioritize that? How do I come up with that? Well, one thing, in talking with the firefighters a couple of weeks ago, I found out, and I was rather shocked, that we lost our IS2 rating. ISO rating for the fire department, and it's now slipped to ISO 4, which can impact your insurance rates. Basically, from what I've been able to determine, that's a staffing issue. With the completion of I-11 around us, that means there are going to be additional demands upon our firefighters, our EMTs, our first responders, and so we're going to have to buttress that. We're going to have to improve. I'd like to see a return to that IS2 standing. I remember 10 years ago going by the fire department, and they proudly had that sign outside, ISO2 station, or fire department. It's not there now. Number two would be the infrastructure. And very simply, what again, my philosophy is fix what we have first. And just a revisit to this development on I-95 and I-11, I was put off by the title of that report. The plan talked about commercial development, restaurants, businesses of all sorts, truck stop, but they'd have to change the zoning, and they'd have to change and add water. They'd have to do a number of different things. And I made the comment at the Planning Commission when that was presented that Boulder City, there is a place already that is the gateway to Hoover Dam, and that's Boulder City. The development of the commercial district, there's going to need to be some additional signage and advertising and promotion for Boulder City when it becomes an option, whether I take the bypass or whether I go into Boulder City. That needs to be done. There needs to be a cleaning up. There needs to be an effective dispersion of RDA money to businesses that actually really need it to clean up their act. We do want to present the small charm, small town environment to our visitors, and that's going to be a little bit of attention. Now, in terms of education, The proposal by Mr. Schulman was heartfelt but wrong-headed. The CCSD is a separate taxing entity. They have their own way of administration. There's nothing in our city charter to cause the council to be involved in the school system. Thank you.
The next question tonight, and Mr. Jorge, you'll be able to go first. Are you in favor of placing mandatory restrictions on the modification or improvement of historic Boulder City homes and other structures? If so, would this include paint colors, demolition of inferior structures? Would this include streets like Avenue D or Avenue M?
I'm in favor of whatever we can do to preserve the historic character of our historic district. However, I'm not in favor of government mandates to encroach upon property rights in this particular regard. At the present time, everything regarding historic district is voluntary. The more appropriate thing to do is for those businesses and those residences that have fallen into disrepair, they should file for the RDA money. They should get the money, the grants, if they're in need of it. I don't believe that this would essentially be setting up a new homeowners and business association with CC&Rs with deed restrictions. I don't see how that legally can be done. Very difficult to do. But the use of the RDA funds, the use of the Historic Preservation Committee, all can be effective in restoring those areas that are blighted. And I think the RDA thing has gone a little bit off track in terms of that. We need to clean up, fess up, and make Boulder City what it always has or aspired to be, a nice, clean, green town.
John Milburn.
Some of the issues that we've been asked to comment on tonight, I struggle with. I'm trying to determine what's the right thing for Boulder City. I have no problem with this particular issue. I think Boulder City has done a wonderful job of preserving our heritage. The advisory capacity that we have now for our Historical Preservation Committee has worked well. I don't know, I'm sure many of you are well aware of the fact that if you are going to do any type of building construction on those buildings, your building permit can be held up until you get to refer to the Historical Preservation Committee. And most of the people who buy those houses, and I've gone up and have some friends who live on Cherry and Birch with the Water and Power Street houses, and it's amazing how well those places have been preserved. So I agree wholeheartedly with Warren, not on every issue, but I do on this one, Warren. The other thing I'd like to talk about is our hotel. The hotel has been a wonderful example of what can be done by voluntary work, and it took a tremendous amount of work to preserve that old building. It had an added advantage that it has revenue sources. We've got the museum in there helps, but certainly having a restaurant in there, and with the donations from a lot of people in town, for many of you that have been here know, it was a struggle. It was a real struggle to preserve that building, and I think it's the city's done a wonderful job. I am definitely not in favor of changing our ordinances that make it where it's just advising. And I do not want to make it mandatory at all. I think that's just going to open up a can of worms that the city will have trouble dealing with, and I like to keep it the way it is right now. Thank you.
Kieran McManus.
Thank you. I'm going to have to disagree with both Mr. Jorge and Mr. Milburn. I am a member of the city's Historic Preservation Committee. I've been on the committee for about a year now. one of the things that I did when I became a member of the committee was try and educate myself as much as possible on what historic preservation means around the country. There are literally thousands of historic preservation codes in existence in the United States. And as I read through many of these, what I found was a lot of similarities between these codes. And there's no surprise there. They were developed from guidelines that the Park Service started on back in 1933. One of the misconceptions that I find is that people believe that all of Boulder City is somehow historic and that anything that would be done would apply to them as well. We have a very well-defined district here in Boulder City. It was done in the mid-'80s. It does not include Avenue M. It does include Avenue F. Many of these neighborhoods have specific architectural features about the houses that are there or the businesses that are there. When you look at historic preservation codes, they only apply to the exterior of the home that faces towards the street. They have nothing to do with the inside of the home. The owners are free to do with that whatever they want. There are no requirements to tear buildings down. There are no requirements on what can be done in backyards or side yards. None of that is ever included in these codes. What we have here in Boulder City is a code that's ineffective. It really doesn't apply to much of anything. It was changed substantially in 2006 to divert away from what you find in most codes. Now, I'm certainly not in favor of telling people what they need to do with their homes, but from talking with people in the historic district, there's a reason that they live in the historic district and they want to see that preserved. So these are not homeowners associations. These are not the big brother coming in. They are guidelines in how we can preserve our history. You know, we lost our old hospital here over a year ago now. That was a building not just within the historic district, but on the National Historic Register of buildings. And again, there was nothing that could be done. We all know, we've all heard the story, nobody did anything, all of that. Well, historic codes should be in place to make sure that we have an effort. We can't save everything, but we should have an effort, especially in a city that bills itself as historic Boulder City. Thank you.
Councilman Cam Walker.
Thank you, and thank you, Kieran, for serving on the Historic Preservation Committee. It's a pleasure when citizens step up and do research and investigate and look into things like historic preservation. We love the beautiful area of Boulder City that is the historic area. I think all of us do, and it really is a compliment to what we're trying to create in Boulder City to allow people to get away from what's going on over the hill. I think this is really interesting that it touches on a fundamental right, the takings clause of our Constitution as it relates to taking of property. We have to be very careful on how we start to implement things that affect private property rights and the rights of you and I as homeowners if government's going to step in and tell you what color to paint your house or whether you can put that tile on or not. You know, I live in a HOA. I've dealt with someone putting in landscape that wasn't specifically right to the guidelines of the HOA, and we had to have an HOA meeting and have a big powwow on whether we were going to sue one of our neighbors or not, and cooler heads prevailed. But I think that the only thing I would look towards in the future, and I've brought this up to the Historic Preservation Commission as well as to the Planning Commission because there was some disagreements on guidelines and how they would be handled, is to make sure that and to consider if new people move into the historic area and recognize the new requirements that they'd be placed under, then we'd start a precedence for the future. And that's what I asked them to look into. I don't think we want to go to, and I forget what state it was, I don't think we want to pull Connecticut's historic preservation documents and bring them into Boulder City and think that's the way we want to do it. And I think our Planning Commission had a good dialogue with the Historic Preservation Commission, but I do think we need to do something, and I hope that they will get together and solve that, because it is important that we protect people's private property interests, but we also protect the integrity of our historic area of Boulder City.
The next question tonight, and Cam, you get to answer first. What are your plans to repair or replace the deteriorating infrastructure in and around Boulder City?
Well, I appreciate the question. Replacing deteriorating infrastructure in and around Boulder City. And I'm happy that when I started on the city council that we had $1.4 million in our utility fund. And it was a trying time at the downturn of 2009 that if one transformer went out, then we would have to replace that for $1 million. And today we set on over $17 million. So last year when we were going through the infrastructure needs of the city and raising rates on the community, I balanced the fact and voted against raising rates because we're not spending the money that we have in the bank. We have $17 million in our utility fund. We have a list of, as the mayor said, $100 million worth of work to do. I think when you have a wish list amongst our Public Works Department, they're going to have a lot of great things they'd like to do. I think we need to hold them accountable as a council on what is the priority and have we explored all the options. Someone brought up the 69 kV loop. I simply asked the question, are there other alternatives? Could we connect with NV Energy for emergency services down there? And they said no. And we got a meeting with NV Energy last month, and they're looking into emergency backup service, which will be a very inexpensive solution to a $5 million problem. And our citizens at least have an alternative to look at. But going back to the question of replacing our infrastructure, in 2012 we did a rate study and it said we wouldn't have to raise rates until 2017. It also said we needed to map the system. And we have not mapped that system. We've been holding our city accountable and wanting them to do it, and I think this year they have a solution to map the system on our electrical side. On our water side and our sewer side, we're getting much more up to speed with the infrastructure and the needs that we have. So we've made great progress. I don't think it ought to be our priority over public safety, but I think it's an important thing that we hold them accountable. Like the power outage that just occurred a day or two ago. What failed? Why did it fail? And how do we repair and replace it? Right after the rate increase last summer, my power went out in my home for about 5 hours. And so I asked those same questions. It's not on the infrastructure list, it's not going to be repaired, and it's a new part of the system. So we would never get to that. So we really need to hold our Public Works Department accountable to know what's being replaced, when and why, and do we have the resources to do that? And right now we do, because we're in great financial shape for the future. Thank you.
Kieran McManus.
When it comes to money, governments are pretty good at spending whatever they get. Looking back, when we look at the bottom of the recession, revenue to the city, from what I've been able to glean out of the budgets, was about $48 million. This year we're about $61 million. We're looking at $10 million in solar lease money, with additional leases coming online probably next year. I can understand where 8 years ago, when the tax revenues were decreasing, why we weren't doing more things with our utilities. As we've now increased quite a bit in what our revenues are, the utility fund actually has a total surplus of $22 million. They have set aside $5 million for some things. They've only identified $9 million in projects, and $2 million of that was for this 67 kV line that they've put on hold for now. So right now, out of that $22 million that's in the utility fund, the only actual projects that are going to be done amount to $7 million. We just had a 17% increase in our utility rates last October. We're looking at additional increases over the next few years that are going to make that about 25% increase. And yet we see an increasing surplus and a list of projects that don't seem to be using that money that we're all paying for now. So again, what I would like to see, as I said earlier, was to take our solar lease money, identify our infrastructure needs that have been neglected for these years, and take care of those projects as quickly as we can. I don't think we need these rate increases that we've received recently. Having attended that and looked at the study that was done, it never said what the revenues were and what the costs were for Boulder City. It just said, well, other cities are paying more than you are. Well, they didn't mention the fact that we get half our power from Hoover Dam, and we get that very cheaply. Okay? There should be an accounting of what we need to do in this town and what these increases are for. If we don't need those, if we have the solar money that's available, we should be using that for our community. Thank you.
John Milburn.
One of the former questions, I was running out of time, and I didn't get to fully complete my thanks to Tom Perkins for the eye-opening that he gave me about this infrastructure repair problem. And I just want to go over that again and point out that, and this is in keeping with what's been said already, is that we really do need to be careful about what particular infrastructure we are dealing with. I said at first that I thought this was up to technical people to deal with, and I was totally surprised when early on in the campaign, when I was faced with an issue, and I thought, I hope that they get this thing squared away before I get elected, because I don't want to have to make a decision on this. The decision at the time was a choice between paying $2 million for a line to hook up from one substation to another, or to spend $6 million to put it underground so some people's view would not be spoiled. I could see, what was going to happen there. I was not looking forward to having to make a decision based upon that. And I cannot believe that those citizens didn't yell and scream. They quietly pointed out that they didn't want that power line, and they went and did their homework, did research, and they came up with 4 or 5 alternate solutions to that power line. I looked at one that I thought was great, involving generators, and I just couldn't believe that the one suggestion that there was already a power line going down there that wasn't being used by Nevada Power. I didn't even think about that, because that can't be that simple. And it turns out that it pretty much was that simple. And I know that Cam Walker and the mayor have gone and talked to Nevada Power, and enough to be able to put that project on hold right now. And I'm thinking we were offered somewhere between $2 and $6 million to solve this problem, and it not only may it not be a problem anymore, but it could save a whole bunch of money. So I am absolutely concerned about the fact that we've talked about these upwards of, I don't know, 50, 100 million of improvements down the line, and I think we need to look very, very carefully at those improvements before we okay them from the City Council. Thank you.
Warren Harvey.
The question itself is kind of strangely worded in that it says, what are your plans to repair or replace deteriorating infrastructure in and around Boulder City? Well, I don't think we're responsible for any infrastructure around Boulder City. Again, simply put, fix what we own first. I don't understand why a person would be talking about infrastructure around Boulder City. But back to the point, what I think would be most effective is to take a look at any engineering charts regarding the failure rate of transmission equipment, transmission lines. As you approach the 50-year point, you see a marked increase in the failure rate of transmission lines, transformers, capacitors, switchgear breakers. And these things are very expensive. The transformers can be $1 million. So there has to be money set aside for that, or we have to have a plan for quick spares replacement so that we're not out in the dark for a long period of time. It seems strange right now, Boulder City is situated between two gigantic energy sources, one from the sky and one from Lake Mead. And we're concerned now with a very old and aging electrical utility. What I would expect, and I'm happy to see, is in the budget there was a placement for a grants writer for the city. And I believe Mr. Armentrout, I think, has been reassigned to that task. Well, I would say that the city investigate every opportunity to let it make its money go further, to explore grants for water and energy conservation, electrical conservation, and maybe an industry pairing with a company like Tesla to put some of those batteries on here for a test or a demonstration program. There's all kinds of opportunities that can make our money go further. In the past, the utility fund has been pilfered to support other projects in the city. And only recently, with the advent of the solar power, now solar leases, is that fund being built up. But again, simply put, fix what we have first. The microphone. Yeah.
All right. We're going to do one more question tonight, and Mr. Jorge, you get to go again. Should revenue from land leases be spent on routine expenses or dedicated to special projects?
Well, I was hoping I could get this question. As I just mentioned, Boulder City has a history of pilfering funds from one account to cover another account. And I'll just say two words: golf course. A flexible approach and a conservative council is a better approach than hard designating money from the solar leases. What is obvious, to me at least, all one has to do is read the newspaper, read the clippings, and you find that we've not been very good conservators of the money. A couple of cases in point. In 2015, the city paid out $800,000 to settle an anti-SLAPP lawsuit, which is a strategic limitation of public participation. $600,000 of that went to attorneys. And I want to get the quote correct. The finance director at the time was quoted in the BC Review saying, "The general fund is more than just taxpayer money. Solar leases really did help." Well, this to me sounds like no problem. The money is falling out of the sky. We can't afford to have that attitude towards our revenues and our resources. We have to have strict controls. We have to have monetary restrictions. We have to be conservative in the resources that we have. There's not another community around that really has money falling out of the sky. The appropriate use of solar leases is really up to the people as to what they want to do in terms of their elected representatives. Again, I view the city council as the supervisor of the people. They make rational, informed decisions about the conservative use of the resources of the city. And that was what I would plan to do as I was the city councilman. Thank you.
John Milburn.
One of the things that I've spent time doing research on in this campaign was trying to read through our city budget. And I'm telling you, it's a job. I've spent several hours going through, and as near as I can tell, with $30 million of revenue, $10 million of that came from our solar leases. I was not aware that it goes directly into our general fund. Now, admittedly, there was some of it that was set aside for capital improvement, but I could only see, and like I said, I'll need more time to study this budget, but it only seemed like as little as $2 million went to capital improvement. I would like to see any future leases not go directly into the general fund, to try to be earmarked or used for special purposes. Like I said, one of the things when you jump into a campaign like many of us have here without fully understanding all the ramifications of what goes on with the budget, you're faced with a lot of work. And I still need to study that further. But in the future, I really think any additional leases, and I'm in favor of pursuing commercial leases for the city. It's one of the things that helped make us what we are today. And in talking to past city councilmen and mayors, they've indicated that they didn't know how the city would have survived through that rough time without these leases. But we now are at a point where I think we should be able to separate that out, and my fear is that some of that money is going for operational expenses and hiring new people. And as you well know, even in my checking account, if my tax return goes into my checking account, it somehow just disappears. Thank you.
Kieran McManus.
I spoke earlier about how good governments are at spending money, and they are. We're talking about tens of millions of dollars here. The solar money, lease money, has been coming into our city for more than a decade now, and we are always promised there's, the rainbow is just over the hill. The grass is going to be greener as soon as we get to the top of the hill, but we never seem to see that. And I really do think part of that problem is because the money goes into our general fund and just kind of gets lost in there. There's other money that our city gets. An example is from the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority. Tourists get charged a tax whenever they rent a room, and Boulder City gets a portion of that tax. It's over $500,000 that we get every year. It just goes into the general fund. I know from talking with our Chamber of Commerce, they would very much like to have some of that money for marketing, which is what the Convention and Visitors Authority does with their money when they get it in Las Vegas. So there's a real problem when money just goes into the general fund and doesn't get separated out or separately accounted for anyway. So I've mentioned it before, I would not be in favor of using our land lease money for our normal expenses. That would be things like our fire and police, our infrastructure, our utilities. For the most part, those we should be getting taken care of from the taxes and fees that we pay. I have mentioned that I would like to see the lease money be used to catch us up on our infrastructure, and I do think that's important. But many of these leases are going to go out for 20 years. Now, we don't know what's going to happen in 20 years. We don't know that something miraculous is going to happen with these leases, and these companies may go out of business. So if we were to depend on that money for our routine expenses, we could be in real trouble just a few years down the line. But I also think that we do have projects here in town that we can foresee for the next 10 years where we could devote that money the way it was always promised to do some special things here in Boulder City. An example is the municipal pool. Comes up every election. We're going to get us a new pool here any day now. Well, at least now we have a plan to make a plan to get a new pool. But we should be doing those types of things. It's what we have that money for, is to do some good things here in Boulder City. Thank you.
Councilman Cam Walker.
Thank you, and I appreciate the comments that have been made. When I started some time ago, we didn't have one of these. This is the financial plan for Boulder City. I would recommend to my colleagues that this is what they read first and foremost over the budget. Because when I started, there was pilfering of money. I was disgusted by the fact that we robbed from the utility fund to pay off the golf course and to build the golf course, which I was not in favor of doing. But I'm proud to say as a report card that we've paid back that money into the utility fund. We've also paid $20 million in principal and interest in debt. We've also added in our utility fund from $1.5 million to now, someone brought up $22 million. Our real number is about 16, 17, 18 in money we can use. Our general fund started at $2.5 million, and now we're sitting at $14 million in our general fund. So we didn't build things right away. We didn't do things like that. Like you and I, we got our house in order financially. And I'm proud of the fact that it's in order financially. Some of the challenges we face ahead are, and I would ask my colleagues to maybe answer to you, what do they plan on cutting in the city? This is our pie chart that shows lease money. This is our rents and royalties for over 25%. It's about 28%. Is our rents and royalties. That's Cascada, that's the solar leases. If you look at the personnel, the 130 plus employees we have, that's more than the rest of the pie. What we've done over the last couple of years is we have taken the time to up our charges for services. So if somebody wants to build homes in the land that is now out, that the voters approved, they're going to pay development fees because growth should pay for growth. If we're going to grow, let's make sure they pay for it. So I'm very happy we have the solar leases. I'm very happy with the other things we've been able to do as a community to get our financial house in order. I've never been a part of a municipal election except in '09 when we talked about a swimming pool. Our house is now in order. We can discuss that. We've put $200,000 into the opportunity to design a new pool so we can come to you as the voters and talk about what we build, how we spend those next 2 solar leases. My goal when I got elected was 5 solar leases. I knew that if we had 5 of them come online in my tenure, lease 4 and lease 5 could be dedicated to a new pool. But I was committed not to lay anyone off after the 2009 downturn, and we didn't do that. We've probably only added 2 or 3 positions in 8 years in our city. We have added in the police department thanks to more cops. But we've really done a good job of managing and using the resources of our city, and we did that because of this financial plan that I was a part of when I got elected in 2009. Thank you.
And now we're going to have a 1-minute wrap-up with each of the candidates. And Cam, if you'd like to go first. 2 minutes? I think we're okay with 2 minutes.
I thought the email said 2. Thank you so much. Thank you for tonight. Thank you for listening. Please come and ask questions. I'm happy of my record. It's been an honor to serve you. I appreciate the fact that the voters have answered twice the call to sell land. I'm not afraid of growth. It's not a 4-letter word. But we as a community have to work together with the council and the community on how we grow, what we do, and how we work within the growth control ordinance. We've been able to do that over the last 8 years. It's not like Chicken Little, the sky isn't falling. We're not building 3,000 homes. We're not doing 1,800 acres. It's all a ploy and a tactic to get you to think that we're going to change dramatically. I'm the only one that has a record of the fact that we have not grown in that abnormal way. We're not going to change that way, but we have to trust one another and recognize you as the voters and how you're going to be involved in this community. I appreciate you and the fact that you have voted to sell land. There are probably other things that we have to do over the next 4 years that I want a chance to do with you. I do want to build a new pool. That's what I set out to do. Our finances are in order, and we have the chance to do it together. I raised my 5 kids here. I don't want it to change. Please vote for me again on June 13th. Thank you.
Kieran McManus.
I also want to thank everybody for coming tonight. You know, this is the first time I've ever run for office. It's one of those things that I never really dreamed about. I became motivated to do that when I started hearing last year these recommendations for the growth that was being planned by our council. I attended many of the Planning Commission meetings, the council meetings, where they were not talking about a little bit of growth. They were talking about thousands of acres of growth. Okay, that conversation has changed since the election started. Suddenly everyone is against growth. Oh no, we didn't want that. Well, the maps indicate otherwise, that what was being done was to have literally thousands of acres of land developed, not only for housing, but for commercial purposes. That has changed, or at least the conversation has changed, but I remain committed. I'm a native of Boulder City. I grew up here. My parents moved here in 1953. My dad taught at the high school. I was just out of high school when the first of the controlled growth ordinance went in. And I will be honest with you, I thought, well, gee, what's that mean for me as a young person? Well, what it meant for me as a young person was that I would have the opportunity to come back and live here in Boulder City and still be able to enjoy one of the best places I've ever lived in my life. Thank you. I appreciate your support.
Hi. Thank you very much for coming. I would just like to say in 1965, when I first came to Clark County, I was fortunately assigned to Boulder City High School as a chemistry and physics teacher, and I immediately fell in love with the school and with the town. I'll be honest with you, I love the town even more today than I did then. And I think the reason why we have the town that we all love right now is our growth ordinance, which for the first 30 years of its existence protected us from the massive growth that was going on in Las Vegas and made us be the town that we are today. Unfortunately, in 2008, with the economic downturn, and Boulder City was not immune to that, we had boarded up buildings over this last few years, decline in the school population, the loss of one of our grocery stores, and things were not looking good. I got into the race because I was concerned about all this growth that people were talking about. I mean, not the gigantic growth that they were afraid of, and I'm looking at the facts that there was none at all. Anyway, since that time, I've become more positive, and I can see with a bid on the land that we have has been approved by the voters that things are looking good. I'm looking forward to the bypass coming, and I would just like to say that those no-growth people who've distorted my views on such as saying that I want uncontrolled growth like they've got in Henderson, it's only strengthen my resolve to continue to look for controlled growth under our controlled growth ordinance and pursue commercial leases on our valuable land owned by the city. I'd appreciate your vote on June 13th. Thank you.
Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for attending this forum. Thanks to the BC Review for sponsoring it. I may be the last to speak, but I'm first on the ballot. My job is to convince you to make me your first choice on that ballot. What's different about me? Well, I'm the guy who has the temporary office on the sidewalk in front of the credit union on Friday afternoons. I'm the guy who's been listening to people coming up and voice their concerns. I'm the guy who's put those concerns basically into what I think I should do as if I'm elected councilman. I'm the guy with fewer political signs. I'm the guy with smaller newspaper ads. I have smaller ads, but I have a bigger idea. I have no paid staff. I have no paid consultants. I'm unafraid to participate in any public forum that discusses the issues regarding this election. I'm different because I haven't asked any of you for any money, and I haven't and won't. I'm doing this all on my own nickel. And I'm proud to do it. I'm a proud citizen of Boulder City for 35 years, And I want to keep Boulder City, Boulder City. Now, in closing, we couldn't get to all the questions. So I took the liberty of typing out all of the questions with all the correct answers. And you can pick up a copy of this clean green solution sheet before you leave. Thank you. And I'd like you to have your vote. Thank you.
Since we seem to be thanking everybody, I too want to thank you all for coming, and especially to our council candidates for their participation, to the community for submitting questions, and now you have a chance to talk to the council candidates individually. Thank you again.